Kia ora everyone, my name is Sharyn Goldstien, and tonight my role is to set the scene, or the context with which we've invited the speakers here tonight, the research lineup, and the context of the conversation that we're having. I want to give you a bit of background to the conversation that we have around the Te Korowai table in informing our discussion moving forward, and hopefully seeing how you can feed back into that discussion, finding some of the points that we've missed. We've had some conversations with fishers throughout the community and face-to-face, and that also has fed some of our lineup tonight, so hopefully you'll see that come through. So the context within which we're working is within a few acknowledgements. We acknowledge that earthquakes are a natural part of New Zealand's history, and with that uplift, which has occurred in the past, the coastal species had recovered from them. We know that and we acknowledge that. But we also acknowledge that the Kaikoura community relies on fishing, not only for commercial gain, but for well-being. That message has come through very strongly through Te Korowai. We've actually tried to apply for funding to involve community a bit more. To date we haven't been successful, but we're still trying on that point. So we certainly acknowledge the desire and the need to open the fishery at some point in the future. We just hope to be able to inform that opening and also what happens when it opens. So we acknowledge that many people would like to see it open, and we'd like to, again, just inform how that happens. What does that look like? Especially given Kaikoura is not just a local fishery. We know that there are many non-local fishers that come to Kaikoura, and we'll touch on that in just a minute. So our questions and concerns that drive our discussions around the table, and that we try to put to community and look for feedback upon, and that we ask researchers for information to guide us through, is recovery happening for the entire coastline and the entire impacted area? Is the system showing resilience to change for the future and incidents that occur in this time? What will happen when the fishery is open, given the changed road conditions? We'll touch on that. And how can we ensure a respectful opening to the fisheries? What does respectful mean to the local community in terms of opening our fisheries, utilising it as a resource, not just an experience? So to put those questions in context, we come back to successional recovery. What happened with the earthquake really was a disturbance event, and there's a lot of knowledge around that in terms of successional ecology in space and time. So I've used a forest here. Mostly I go back to the forest so it doesn't bias my own view of the ocean. Being a marine scientist myself, I think I know what should be happening, so if I come back to the forest it takes me out of the system a little bit, so hopefully that will do that for you as well. What we see in this picture is the really nice climax community, like what we had before the earthquake, over in the end there, so this is what we probably had once before, and the earthquake took us back to somewhere around here. And what we see is taking out a lot of the species. I think what we're going to hear is that the richness, or many of the species, have not gone completely, but they have reduced a lot in abundance in that time. The scary thing with successional ecology is it depends who gets in first as to how the shores recover. So at each point along this successional process can look like recovery, but also at each phase we can get a switch to a different state depending on the environmental context within which the recovery is happening. And we'll hope to hear a little bit about that in a moment. Regression can occur at any point. Just when we think we're getting to that climax community, an event can happen that will bring us right back to the beginning. And that's where that resilience for the community has to be there before we know that it's a ready to go sort of climax environment. The area of recovery is always in our minds. We aren't just focused on the Kaikoura Peninsula, for instance. We know that there's variable impacted sites along 120 kilometres of coastline. We know that connection between these sites is really important for the recovery of the entire coast. If we take out the connections, then some areas will never recover. And we've got a speaker who will speak particularly to that broader scale generational time for recovery. Supply of the young matters, so we will hear about the recruitment of the younger power, particularly tonight. That's a really important step, not just recovery of, not just seeing the juveniles in our local area, but how they're spreading across the entire coast. For us, that's a really important point to consider, and often why we say we don't have enough information, because we don't know how that's spreading along the entire coast. Generations for us is the it's generations, not years. I know 3 years seems like a really long time. For the researchers, that's 3 data points, and actually maybe only 2.5 for some of our researchers. 2 seasons of collections of data. For power, that's one period of growth, or 3 periods of growth, but not up to reproduction. So until they get to reproduction, we need to help them get to that point. So it's generations that we need to consider, not just we can see a lot of abalone. This is the resilience that I'm talking about. Heat, temperature, heat waves. We've seen these in the literature through science. We've seen it in the newspapers. We know Kaikoura and New Zealand have had in the last 2 years temperature rises that we haven't seen in the past. We know there have been incidences recently on the shore that had potential impact. Luckily that was dealt with, but that could have been another impact on our recovering shore. We also see here Undaria, an invasive species, which is currently contained. We had 20 young people out in the water just last week, just this weekend, 20 young people from Kaikoura. We were looking for Undaria and how it might have spread. We were in a spot where we knew there was a lot of it. But keeping mindful that with the seaweed, the diversity of the shore, comes the potential for invasion, which can again alter that stable state at the end. That's where it could regress or shift to a completely different state. The key to resilience is diversity, so not just our single species of our fishery focus, but the habitat, the seaweeds, the other species. When the fishery opens, it's not just the power that gets fished, it's the boo-boo, it's the smaller snails, it's the intertidal zone, it's the subtidal zone. So we think of that whole picture that's required for resilience of the coast. The age spread, I said that the young are important to supply the young to other populations, but we need those big power really reproducing hard, and we need the young to be turned around, and everything needs to survive in the middle. Not just the power, the whole system. That includes the seaweeds. They too have sort of ages, don't they, Robin? An age spread is what we need to see. Are we getting that good age spread? The habitat health and productivity, and this is where everyone kind of puts the seaweed in that basket of productivity. Is the seaweed there for the butterfish and the power and the crays and every other organism that uses it? Is there enough to build that resilience? So these are the 3 sort of areas, I suppose, when I look at the coastal recovery and the information we need. The resilience for the future requires these 3 points. And we hope to hear how that's going from our researchers. And finally, my final point is that this is not just a local fishery. Where is the non-local fish are coming, and where are they going, more importantly, when they get here? So this brings in our nectar program that, of course, we all know very well. We know that there are 7 safe stopping areas along the coastal State Highway 1 that are being developed now, and there are also other pull-in areas that are currently being, I guess, refined, and I get Will Doherty is here to speak to that later if needed, if we need more information on that. But what I want to really highlight here is that there are particular stopping spots. Given the power fishery particularly now is pretty much wadeable, which means that those people who never were competent now are competent to fish. And because they've got some safe stopping spaces, they have some areas that they might use more than others. So the question is the local fishing effort enough to offset some of that localised fishing pressure from our non-local fishers? So that's a question that we'll keep in mind as well. So really what we want to get out of this evening, we want to hear the researchers' information, we want to get your feedback, but most important for me is what is the local message when we go out of Kaikoura, to the spearfishers, to the Canterbury fishers, to the tourists, to the Nelson Picton fishers. What's our message to them about how we want them to treat the shore of Kaikoura alongside our local fishers? So that's a really important point, I think, for me to get out of this evening as well. And that's why we have the post-it notes, the emails, and the many ways to contact us. So with that all in mind, that's the context within which I've asked the researchers to provide their information, because they have a lot of data, and we're hoping to really find out, has there been change, where, and what sort of patchiness or resilience do we think is built into it. Some of those questions they will not be able to answer yet. As I've said, they've really only got 2.5 years, 2.5 seasonal data points. So they will do their best. So we've got here some community efforts. Early on there was some power translocations which the community was involved with. And Dr. John Perker is going to give us a rundown on how that looks now. We'll run into the Power Juvenile Habitat and the intertidal diversity, that diversity that's so important for the resilience. Then Dr. Robin Dunmore from Hawthorne Institute will go into the subtidal environment, that's the diversity again of the subtidal seaweeds and the other community members that are down there. Then we will switch back to the power, we'll go into the Power Industry Council. Dr. Tom Gowan's going to give us an overview of the adult research that's been done for the power. And Professor Jonathan Gardner, he's here from Victoria University. He has done a lot of genetics work and he will give us that really good generational aspect on what it means for recovery. He's also done a lot of marine reserve work, so understands that expansion from small locations. So hopefully he'll be able to give us a good overview on that. So that's all I'm going to say, and I'm going to hand over to Dr. John Perker to give us that, or to Marcel Lestra, the UC crew, let's say, to sort themselves and give us that overview on their research. Thank you.